I am a mailman any other you have ever known. My deliveries do not go to homes filled with laughter or bustling with life. Instead, I deliver letters to the dead, the silent and forgotten souls whose addresses are carved in stone or whispered in the darkness. My route winds through the forgotten corners of New Orleans, where shadows cling to the cracked sidewalks and the air tastes of decay and old secrets. The first time I realized what I truly was on a rainy evening in the dream neighborhood. I had been walking up a narrow street, lined with ancient oak trees hung with Spanish moss. When I reached the door of number 1121, the house was abandoned, but the mailbox was full of letters addressed to people long gone. I hesitated, but I slipped a letter into the crevice anyway. The next day, I found a tombstone in St. Louis, Cemetery number 1, with the same name as the letter I had delivered. Since then I have been caught in a nightmare that I cannot escape. My every step is haunted by voices only I can hear, and eyes watching from beyond the veil. Every delivery drags me deeper into a world where the dead do not rest, and the living must pay a terrible price. That night I heard a whisper as I approached the iron gate of Lafayette Cemetery. The voice was cold and urgent, calling my name. It led me to a freshly dug grave. I found an envelope sealed with wax resting on the damp earth. Inside the letter was written in a handwriting I could not recognize, but the words burned into my mind with a terrifying clarity. They said that I was the last to deliver a message that could unleash something far worse than death itself. My hands trembled as I looked over my shoulder. The fog had thickened, and shapes seemed to crawl in the mist. I ran, but the path behind me twisted into a labyrinth I could not escape. I realized then that I was no longer just a messenger. I was part of a curse older than the city itself, and every letter I delivered brought me closer to a darkness that wanted me to disappear forever. I tell you this because soon you may receive a letter from me, but do not open it. For once the dead have something to say, the living become the next to listen. The night after the letter at Lafayette Cemetery, I could not sleep. My mind replayed those cursed words over and over like a cruel chant. I felt the weight of something watching me from the shadows beyond my small apartment in the French Quarter. The humid air pressed against my skin, as if the darkness itself was breathing down my neck. The next day, I told myself to carry on, as usual, deliver the letters, no questions, no hesitation. But the streets had changed. The familiar corners twisted into strangers. The faces I passed seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like ghosts themselves, waiting for me to slip up and see what they truly wet. The edge of the Garden District. I reached a wrought iron gate, marked number 3267. The house beyond was grand and empty, yet the mailbox bulged with letters addressed to a woman named Eleanor Boudreau. She had died years ago, but her name was scrawled on every envelope I had yet to deliver. I slid one letter through the slot, and as I stepped back, the air shifted. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath came out in sharp clouds. A cold hand brushed my shoulder, and a voice whispered, "Your time is running out." I spun around, but the street was deserted, except for the swaying branches above my heart, hammered in my chest like a warning drum. I knew then that the dead were no longer content to wait quietly for their mail later. That evening I found myself standing at the gates of Metairie Cemetery, where the stone angels stood silent and cold. Under the moonlight I placed another letter into the box of a man named Charles Dubois, whose grave was said to be cursed for stealing the lives of others in life and death. As I turned to leave, the ground beneath me shifted, and a hand shot out, clawing at my ankle. I stumbled and looked down into a dark pit, where eyes gleamed with hunger. The hand disappeared, but the memory lingered like poison. I ran until the cold night air burned my lungs and the city lights blurred into streaks of orange and white. My sanity frayed. With every step I took, the dead were no longer just recipients of letters. They wanted me. They wanted my fear, my sweating one. I finally reached my apartment. I locked the door and pressed my back against it, my hands shaking. I knew I had crossed a line. The mail I carried was a gateway I had been opening with every delivery, and whatever was behind it was breaking through the cracks of my world. The letter from Lafayette Cemetery had warned me, but I ignored it because sometimes the truth is a trap. and I was already caught in its cruel web. I never believed in curses or ghosts, but that night, in the darkened streets of New Orleans, I became a prisoner to both. The letters I carried no longer felt like paper, but like chains pulling me toward something ancient and malevolent. I was delivering to a forgotten crypt on Royal Street when the sky turned as black as pitch, the air grew thick and heavy, and the city sounds died away until only my footsteps echoed against the cracked stones. I reached the iron door of number 924 and slid the letter inside, but before I could turn, a cold breath curled around my neck. I spun and saw nothing but the shadows deepening as if they were alive, watching me. Waiting then, the voices started whispering names I did not know, pleas for help, threats I could not understand. Suddenly, the ground beneath me cracked open. A hand with rotten flesh shot out, grabbing my ankle. I screamed and fought, but more hands emerged, dragging me down into the cold earth. The faces of the dead appeared around me, pale eyes and hollow mouths, their whispers growing louder until they were screams tearing at my mind. I fought with every ounce of strength, and just when I thought I would be pulled under forever, I broke free and stumbled into the night. Gasping for breath, I saw the letter I had delivered, fluttering on the ground like a warning. I understood then. The dead were not waiting for their letters, they were sending messages through me, messages that could open gates better left sealed. My own reflection, in a broken window, twisted into something monstrous. My skin chilled to ice, my heart pounding like a funeral drum. If I do not these letters, I will become one of them. A forgotten soul trapped between worlds, forever condemned to carry messages no living man should ever bear. I am the mailman. I deliver letters to dead people, and every delivery brings me closer to the darkness that will swallow us all. After that night, I could not go back to normal. Delivering letters became a battle between me and something unseen. My hands trembled every time I approached a mailbox, as if the shadows themselves were ready to pounce. One morning, I found a note slipped inside my bag. No return address, no signature, just a message written in blood-red ink. Stop now or lose yourself forever. But I could not stop. The letters kept coming, like a curse written on the wind. I followed the names, tracing them to cemeteries, abandoned houses, and even beneath the city, in forgotten tunnels. In the darkness beneath Canal Street, I found a hidden door covered in strange symbols. The air inside smelled of rot and old earth. I pushed it open, and the sound of whispered prayers met my ears. There in the blackness was a shrine of letters piled high like a tower of forgotten souls. The names on them were the very ones I had delivered to, and the letters were not finished messages scrawled in invisible ink that only the dead could read. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my wrist, and the voice whispered, "You carry the final message. You must deliver it to the place where life ends and death begins." I barely escaped, but the warning was clear. The last letter I carried was not for the dead, but for me. The city around me blurred, as if reality itself was unraveling. The streets twisted into impossible shapes, and the faces of the dead appeared in every window and mirror. I understood then the terrible truth. I was not just a mailman, I was a messenger between worlds, and the letters I delivered were keys to something that should never be unlocked. The darkness was coming, and it wanted me to open the final door. The city had become a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. I could no longer tell where the living ended and the dead began. Every letter I carried was a thread pulling me deeper into a nightmare with no escape. One evening, I found myself at the edge of Bayou St. John, where the water glistened like liquid glass beneath the moonlight. I was supposed to deliver a letter to a man named Victor LeBlanc, long dead but rumored to haunt the swamp. The letter felt heavy in my pocket, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 souls. When I reached the old boat dock, the fog rolled in thick, and a figure appeared on the water, a man in tattered clothes with eyes like burning coals. He smiled and spoke in a voice that echoed from the depths. "Your time is almost over, mailman. Soon, the last message will be delivered, and the door will open." I tried to run, but the swamp seemed to twist around me. The water rose at my feet, whispering secrets in a language I could not understand. The figure reached out his hand, and I felt a cold pull, as if he wanted to drag me beneath. The surface. I woke up in my apartment drenched in sweat. The letter was gone, but the curse remained. I knew that the final delivery was not far away, and that whatever waited beyond that door would change. Everything I searched for answers among old books and dusty records at the New Orleans Public Library, only to find references to an ancient ritual that could bind the living and the dead forever. The ritual required a messenger, a mailman who carried the last letter, the letter that would awaken the darkness beneath the city. I was that mailman, and I was running out of time. The old texts I found were written in a language long dead, but the meaning was clear. The ritual was a gateway, a bridge between the living world and a realm where restless souls lingered, hungry and vengeful. It was said to have been used centuries ago to bind a terrible force beneath the city, but now the bindings were weakening. The mailman was not just a deliverer of letters, but the key to either sealing or unleashing that force. Again my hands shook as I read the instructions. The final delivery had to be made at midnight, in a place called the Forgotten. Crossing deep beneath the city, in the tunnels that connected the oldest cemeteries, felt the weight of the last letter in my pocket. Though I could not find it, I was sure it was the one that would decide everything. Every step I took from that moment on was shadowed by dread. The streets seemed darker, the air thicker, and the whispers louder. The dead no longer waited silently, they demanded, they begged, and some threatened. At the stroke of midnight, I found myself standing at the entrance to the Forgotten Crossing. The tunnels yawned like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I could feel the presence of something ancient and terrible. Waiting in the dark, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The walls closed in, and the air grew colder with every step. My heart pounded like a war drum as the voices rose into a crescendo, chanting in a language that clawed at my sanity. Then I saw it, the altar covered in faded symbols and surrounded by bones. The final letter lay there, glowing faintly. With a sickly light, I reached out and touched it. The moment I did, a scream shattered. The silence and the darkness exploded around me. The ground trembled, the walls cracked open, and from the abyss rose shapes too horrible to describe. Faces twisted in agony, hands reaching for me from the void. I realized then there was no turning back. The mailman was no longer delivering letters. The mailman was delivering fate. The darkness was no longer just around me, it was inside me. The twisted faces clawed at my mind, whispering promises of power and doom. I felt my soul unraveling like fragile thread caught in a storm. I dropped the letter, but it did not fall. It hovered, pulsing with a sinister light, as if alive. The altar beneath it cracked, and from the fissures spilled a cold mist that crept toward me. Like living shadow, my body screamed to flee, but my feet were rooted in place. The voices grew louder, demanding I complete the ritual to open the final door. Suddenly, a figure stepped from the mist, a woman draped in tattered white robes. Her eyes hollow, yet burning with desperate hope, she reached out her hand and spoke in a voice that echoed like a distant bell. You must choose, mailman. Deliver the last letter, and unleash the darkness, or destroy it, and be trapped forever between worlds. I looked into her eyes, and saw the torment of 1,000 lost souls. The weight of my choice crushed me, but there was no hesitation. The world depended on stopping the darkness. With a scream that shattered the silence, I grabbed the letter and ripped it in two. The light flickered and the mist recoiled as if wounded. The ground shook violently and the tunnel began to collapse. I ran blindly through the darkness with the voices howling behind me. The air grew thin and cold, but I pushed forward, desperate for escape. I burst into the night air, gasping for breath. The city lights looked like distant stars in the fog. My body was weak, but my mind was burning with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. The mailman may have destroyed the last letter, but the darkness was not defeated. It had only been delayed, and I was its unwilling messenger. For the war between the living and the dead was just beginning. I thought breaking the letter would end it, that by destroying the final message, I could escape the curse, but the city had other plans. The very air around me felt charged with unseen menace. The dead no longer waited silently in their graves, they prowled the streets, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, like hunters searching for prey. like hunters searching for prey. My nights for survival. Shadows moved with intent, and whispers followed me like a dark tide threatening to drown my sanity. One night near the French market, I saw a figure I recognized, the woman from the tunnels. Her hollow eyes held no hope now, only sorrow. She told me the darkness was fractured but alive. It was seeking new ways in through cracks I had created by my defiance. She warned me that the mailman's curse was not just to deliver letters, but to carry the burden of keeping the dead from crossing over completely. I realized then that I was bound to this city and its restless spirits. A guardian trapped in a nightmare that never ends. I still deliver letters, but now I know each one is a warning or a plea from the other side, a desperate attempt to hold back the darkness inch by inch. The mailman is no longer just a messenger. I am a watcher, a prisoner of the city's dead souls, and the horrors they bring the city's dead had become relentless. Their whispers, like knives in my mind, their shadows creeping closer every night. I knew I could not keep running or hiding. The darkness wanted me to break. Togivini began searching for ways to fight back, visiting voodoo priests and ancient shrines hidden among the twisted streets of New Orleans. I sought forgotten rituals and charms to hold the shadows at bay. One night, deep in the bayou, I found an old woman who called herself Madame Laveau. She told me that the mailman's curse could be broken, but only at a terrible cost. To close the door between worlds, I would have to bind my soul to the threshold, forever becoming a guardian, not just of letters, but of the living and the dead. I faced the choice I had feared since the beginning: sacrifice my freedom, or let the darkness consume everything. I loved the ritual was set for the next full moon, in the heart of the city beneath the ancient oak tree in Louis Armstrong Park, where the veil between worlds was thinnest. As I stood there, reciting the incantations, Madame Laveau's chants filled the air. The ground trembled and the spirits rose, writhing and screaming, as if fighting to escape. I felt my soul stretch and tear as I became the living seal between two realms. The darkness clawed at me, but I held firm. The mailman was no longer just a messenger. I was a gatekeeper, but the price was steep. I would never walk the streets freely again. My life forever bound to the restless dead. The ritual ended, but nothing was the same. The city breathed around me like a living tomb, and I could feel the dead watching from every corner there. Whispers were no longer threats, but constant companions in my mind. I became the mailman, forever bound to deliver messages, not just to the dead, but between worlds, to keep the darkness locked away. I sacrificed my freedom and my humanity. The letters never stopped coming, each one a reminder of the souls waiting beyond the veil, their voices sometimes pleading, sometimes accusing. I walked the streets alone, a shadow among shadows, delivering letters to the dead while the living walk unawares of nights. I wonder if this curse was always meant for me, or if I was just the last in a long line of mailmen trapped in this endless nightmare. The city's heartbeat is slow and mournful beneath the moss-draped oaks. The dead are never far, and neither am I. If you ever find a letter addressed to you with no return address, do not open it. For once the mailman delivers the last message, the door between worlds will open again, and there will be no escapee. The mailman. I deliver letters to dead people, and I will never rest, and I will never rest.